The following is a special edition of School Scene Magazine, Levy Equalization and its effects on your schools. The economic times we're all facing is a challenge. The fix is not eliminating the tools necessary to educate our children.
I'm disappointed. I'm more than disappointed. I don't want to say I'm angry, but we've got to make sure that we get these necessary resources.
We're going to have to reduce staff, reduce program. We're going to have to reduce the amount of expenditures, and when that happens, you know, people lose their jobs and kids lose services.
Hi, I'm Ray Talkacher, Superintendent of Schools in the Prosser School District, and I want to welcome you to a special edition of School Scene Magazine, looking at our public schools in Washington from the inside looking out. Funding for public schools is complicated and difficult to understand, even for those of us working in the public school system. For our program today, it's important to understand school levies and how they factor into this equation. Levy dollars are not intended to be, nor have they ever been intended to be, used for basic education. But as state revenues continue to decline, districts will rely heavily on these local tax dollars to make up the differences. Districts are allowed to use levy dollars for up to 28% of their budgets. But when it comes to levies, not all districts are created equal. Levy dollars are paid by property owners, and property values vary greatly across our state. You can see how some districts with dense population and high property values come out on the top of the levy game. For several decades now, the state has provided levy equalization dollars in an attempt to level the playing field between property-rich districts and property-poor districts. The intent is to provide all school districts across this state with a more uniform system in which they have the ability to offer similar opportunities and services to their students regardless of where they live. Most school districts in the state depend on levy equalization funds as a significant portion of the needed revenues to operate our schools. But because levy equalization dollars are not considered by some in Olympia as basic education, they are not protected by our state constitution and are on the chopping block. The impact of any loss of levy equalization to local school districts will be seen in every aspect of district operations. To have a better understanding of any reductions to levy equalization, let's take a visit to the Grandview School District and have a talk with Superintendent Kevin Chase. Hi, we're in the Grandview School District. Kevin, thanks a lot for having us here today.
Thanks for coming, Ray.
The legislature in Olympia is looking at levy equalization, which is a really important part of the funding for public schools in Washington State as a possible reduction in revenues to school districts. From your perspective, what is the difference between a levy that a school goes to the ballot for and levy equalization?
Well, let's start with the local levy that the voters go and vote for in your local ballot boxes. That money is raised locally, and it's there to bridge the gap between what the operating costs of a district are annually and what the state and federal government funds us, because there's a big gap between the two. And so all around the state, local levy voters go to their polls and support their public schools by paying property taxes, and that's the local levy.
And so what is levy equalization?
Well, in many districts around the state, in fact, about 240 districts around the state, the cost of doing business for a year and the revenue received from the state is nowhere near what it costs to run it. And so they have to go to the local voters, and those local voters would have to pay an exorbitant tax to be able to make up the difference. And so the state has kicked in some dollars for those districts that are property poor, meaning their constituents would have to pay a large tax to be able to make up that gap. And the state over time has contributed money to help offset those taxes.
So school districts around the state that have to run programs consistently, will they be in jeopardy of keeping those programs going if the levy equalization is reduced by the legislature in the state?
Well, when you think about our budget's about $33 million annually, and our levy equalization funds are $3.6 million, and what we can raise from our local voters is a little over $1 million. And honestly, I think our voters are paying their fair share. And I don't think they're going to be able to come out and support the $3.6 million increase in property taxes. Just can't happen.
Well, you know, there constantly is a discussion, and I know there's some lawsuits in this state about the state not funding basic education that's set out in the Constitution. How will this reduction in levy equalization affect the programs if the state isn't funding currently the way that the courts are saying that they should be?
You know, Ray, there's two things that the state constitution really calls out for. One is ample funding of basic education, which is at question now and in fact is in front of the Supreme Court for a decision. The second part of it is a uniform system of public education. And when you begin to not have the same ability to pay your bills across the state, in fact 240 districts will not have the same ability to make sure that their kids have the same education as the other districts out of the 296. There's a real question about uniform system of public education.
So since the state really, by the court's decision so far, says that basic education isn't funded the way the Constitution says it's supposed to be, what things in your school district are being covered by your levy equalization money and your levies that aren't covered by the state?
Well, I think people, if you went to the person on the street, I think if you asked them what's basic education, please describe what you would consider your son's day. And they would say, well, he's going to get picked up by the bus driver. He's going to be taken to school and met by the security officials outside, the parapros, the crossing guards, and then he may go in and get some food service. And then if he has some issues around health, maybe they need to see the nurse, and maybe there'll be a counselor involved, and perhaps they'll go on to the librarian and then into class. So when you begin to think about that, the only thing that's funded by basic education is the teacher in the classroom. And the rest of it we have to carve out of the money that we have left over through levy and levy eq.
So in the Grandview School District, as an example, what would happen if you were cut the full levy equalization? How much is that, and what would that look like in Grandview?
Well, you know, we've done some calculations, Ray, and looked at the numbers that we would have to do. That's 70 employees that we consider being funded out of levy equalization. So that would, you wouldn't see counselors in the halls, you wouldn't see librarians in the libraries, you wouldn't see nurses, you wouldn't see the number of staff that we have to support. You wouldn't see drug and alcohol counselors, you wouldn't see the basic things that help kids that are outside the classroom that people take for granted.
Even if you passed your levy, your election, which you need to pass at 50%, what would happen to your instructional programs if you passed your levy and didn't get your levy equalization?
Well, you would lose all the people that I mentioned to start with, but you'd also lose teachers. You'd have to reduce the number of teachers and increase the number of kids per class. So you would see class sizes in the 25 to 30 range at the elementary school level, and 30 to 35 at the middle school, and maybe 35 to 40 at the high school levels. You would lose teachers, and you would lose what we would consider good practice.
Have you had any recent notification of cuts from the federal government?
Yeah, we just received last week a 1.5% cut in our federal funding. And honestly, I think we're going to see more. I think with the debt reduction team, we're going to see more cuts to education from the federal funds.
So how do you handle those kinds of reductions in the middle of the year when you've already budgeted for it?
Oh, the problem is we've already had people on contract. If there's people that aren't on contract, for example, any classified employees, those people, the paraprofessionals and the people that need the money the most, the people that are working in our communities, live in our communities, they're going to be the ones to suffer the cuts.
Well, I'll tell you something. We're lucky that we have people at running school districts that understand the importance of what's going on right now and have the vision to be able to deal with it. And we really appreciate coming here to Grandview today to get an idea of how levy equalization will affect this school district if it's reduced. So we really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for coming, Ray, because it is a very important issue that I think our local voters and local constituents need to know, that we're really at risk, and the education for their kids in their schools is at risk.